Sir Iain Duncan Smith joins us in the Daily Tea studio. Lovely to see you.
Welcome, Iain.
Welcome.
Lovely to have you here.
Former Conservative Party leader, the aspiring MP to win back Chingford and Woodford Green. Shall we grasp the nettle and talk about the Farage factor? Your reaction to yesterday, and how do you think it affects things for the Conservatives?
I've known Farage for years, and I don't think it changes, it refocuses. In other words, that there is a burbling problem, we know, with reform, because they're at higher levels than UKIP were at that stage, and there's a lot of disenchantment with the government for lots of reasons, but that's where it is. And so into that rather dirty pond, Farage is always there to be seen, and now he's publicly there. I think there must have been some kind of spat in reform over the fact that he didn't want to stand. I was on a podcast about 5 days ago when he was adamant he wasn't standing because he didn't have enough time to prepare a constituency and to win it. Whereupon now he does have enough time, apparently, to prepare a constituency about a week later. So there's a hint of hypocrisy, but that's always the case with him. So what he has now convinced himself of, or at least he's been convinced by those in reform, that without him they don't stand a chance of moving further ahead and thus really making inroads into the Conservative vote. But with him, they stand a chance of getting non-stop publicity, which is a thing that they won't get. And you heard that today, a long interview on the Today programme. Everybody will get him up onto their programmes. He is identifiable with this. So finally, I think he's caved in to the idea that he's got time to do this and then go off and help if Trump decides to stand to do that at the same time. So he's obviously been persuaded or bullied or pushed to do that. But he certainly does up the game of reform by being constantly there and constantly speaking and being the face of reform.
Now, Sir Iain, you said that for many reasons the Conservatives are so far behind in the poll. What's your analysis of why the Conservatives are so far behind?
I think there's a number of things. The first thing is that the public doesn't, I think, give politicians credit when they look back for when there are big crises. They assume that that's what you're going to do because you're the government. So all the stuff that happened during COVID, I find, has pretty much been forgotten. If not forgotten, it's not right there in the front of your brain, as it were, when you're talking to them. That's the first thing. So when the government goes on about what they did in COVID, it doesn't really land because people say, well, yeah, OK, but that's what you do.
So Sunak talking about furlough, not overly
furlough, people remember it was done, but they don't, it's not something they say, oh, great, thanks for that, because this is a while back for them and they've moved on. Had we gone into a growing economy, everything singing and dancing, Russia had not invaded Ukraine, that might be a different matter. But that has now replaced the COVID bit. And that bit is almost always, because of the economy, going to start being blamed on a government. You know, my income doesn't cover my costs, cost of living is difficult, taxation is too high. All of that then becomes the problem that really confronted them, which is cost of living. Whereas, you know, furlough and all that sort of stuff, they got through it. But this stuff really hurts. And so the post-Ukraine stuff is in the front of their brains. And that, of course, is difficult for the government for the very simple reason that they were in government when cost of living soared, interest rates have soared, businesses have suffered as a result. And there is always a tendency of the public to sort of say, right, well, you were in government, that was your fault, you should have done something about it, and we've all suffered as a result. So that bit, I think, is the blockage in the road to remember some of the stuff that they did do. And the second bit is the Partygate stuff. When you raise it, still resonates a bit about bad behaviour, all that sort of thing. So that also then starts to trump the whole idea of COVID as being a rescue mission by the government. And the government did huge amounts and spent huge sums of money in doing it. But that stuff goes back into the, not mist of time, but it just goes back into the back of your brain.
When you're on the doorstep, aren't Tories saying to you, you know, in 14 years, I've seen immigration go up when you said it would go down. I've seen tax go up when you said it would go down. And I've seen government spending go up when you said it would go down. I mean, that argument is really hard to rebut, isn't it? This idea of, you know, 14 years of Tory failure on some of the policies that are important to that caucus of voters.
Of course it is, and that comes up the whole time. Although we know for a fact that a huge amount of that sits in the COVID period when we had to spend huge sums of money, and then coming out of that you have to get that money back, so that means getting your budget back in balance. All that sort of stuff had a massive impact already. Without the cost of living crisis, was already going to hit everybody. So lots of stuff that we couldn't do, didn't do, would have done otherwise, gets lost in that. then, as I said earlier on, the cost of living comes into it, because the repercussions, not just of the invasion, but also the fact the invasion and the problems over fuel landed right square across our economy and every other economy when we'd already just done COVID. So we were less prepared for the cost of living than we would have been perhaps normally. Two massive blows on an economy. So straight away, that is exactly what they're going to say, because those are the facts. Facts of taxes have gone up, borrowing went up, unemployment stayed low, but the reality is an awful lot of people have now, as a result of slackening off the welfare system during COVID, have gone on to welfare rather than, as it was at the time when I was there, the lowest number of workless households since records began is now not the case any longer. These things sit in their brains and they say, but that's you. You were here 14 years. This is where we are now. So that's a very difficult trick for us. It's why no government has gone beyond this period, because it's very, very difficult to be able to persuade people that actually you will get it right. Now, I happen to think the economy is beginning to come right, but that's a very tough ask to say, trust us, because this stuff hurt you, but now we've got a better record.
Are you quite resigned to defeat then?
No, I'm never resigned to anything, because I don't, by the way, I just don't see the polls on the street. The one thing I don't get from these polls, which makes me think this is a little bit like 1992, and I was here in 92, is that they're a mile wide but about an inch deep. That is to say, in 97, they'd made their minds up. Blair was great, Brown was okay, they were going to vote for them. It was wholly different. It was like a soft Tory government with a bit more heart. That would be okay.
And you knew it, Iain, didn't you?
Well,
knew it.
I knew it from
the
96 onwards, because I was knocking on doors and that's the response we were getting. I'm not going to get that response. What I get is anger and upset, obviously, because the government's had to preside over this difficulty, and let's be honest, that's where we are. But, as I say, I think beginning to get things better, but that's not the case right now, so they look at that. But when you ask them what do, I just don't get the impression that they say, I'm desperate for the Labour Party, they're the ones I want. What you get is, I don't know, I can't vote for your party, I'm fed up. It's more negative than a sort of subsequent positive. And I just don't see the positive that comes out of these polls that says, I'm definitely going to vote for Labour because I think they'll do a better job. I have never had anybody say that to me, by the way, when I go around knocking doors. Genuinely, and I'm there, been there 5 years, just banging on doors since the last election and before that. I just don't get people saying, I get it, I want Labour. It was very different in 96, 97. I don't get that now, which makes me feel when Kinnock was there was still that sense that somehow I'm fed up with you guys, you screwed up a few things, this is a problem. But there just wasn't that sense, which is where, I don't know. I know the pollsters who know everything, apparently, they will tell me that I'm wrong. But in all my experience of 4 or 5 years now being knocking on doors and talking to people, that's just the sense I get, that there isn't a love for Labour. There is an anger, certainly, because of the issues around cost of living and various other things, for the government, which there always will be, of course. The question then becomes, what kind of a government do you really want? And then when you kind of local issues, I think the real question is, who do you want to champion you in Parliament? And that resonates as an argument, I think. It's really, who do you want, not what do you want, is going to be the key question as to whether people turn out or don't turn out at the next election, which I have a few is going to be one of the deciding factors.
I think, Serene, a lot of what you've just said, Camilla and I were speaking about this earlier today, is shared actually within Labour. People are not positively going for Sir Keir Starmer. They are very worried about turnout. And I think, as you say, if you have a strong local candidate, I think there could be quite a few seats where people buck the trend, where if there's a candidate who is seen to have been good for the constituency, to have fought on, I don't know, for example, Serene, in your constituency, Whipps Cross Hospital is a really, really huge local issue about when will it be rebuilt, when will it be finished, etc., etc. They could really matter in this campaign. When it comes to reform, given that possibly little enthusiasm for the Conservatives for the reasons you've outlined, little enthusiasm for Labour for the reasons you've outlined, doesn't that mean that 2024 is very different from previous iterations of the Brexit Party, of UKIP, because there is, as it's been described, in the two main parties, the bland leading the bland. And that will allow Farage to maybe on this occasion be more successful than he has been in the past?
Well, there's always possibilities in that. My view is that reform are part of that process that says, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm fed up with you. I don't get the others. There's a party over there I can go and say, excuse my language, sod the lot of them, I'm not going to vote for you guys. So either I stay at home or I go somewhere else, put my vote there and say, that's the kind of stuff that I'm after. That's always going to be the case. And certainly with Reform, they are becoming that party. Interesting, look at the Liberal Democrats. They don't really seem to be making much of a move in the course of this election when you might have expected them to be doing it. They're kind of level pegging at the moment, I saw, with Reform. It shows you that people are now saying, well, I want to protest, but I don't necessarily want to protest somebody who's on the left. I want to protest somebody who's on the right. So now you're getting people thinking about that. So my question really, though, at the end of the day for Reform is your whole pitch at the moment is anti-conservative. You don't think we've gone far enough. And as I was explaining to somebody on the doorstep the other day, I said, if you go for Reform, what you actually get is everything that you don't want. Okay? So the local bit is important. Do they trust you as a local MP? You've always said you would do something, and you do it. I spend my whole time fighting for everything from policing on the streets to stopping the tower blocks to doing the Whipps Cross Hospital, which we pretty much got in the bag. We have got the money in the bag. We've just got the final say-so on build. But all of those things you keep saying, saving libraries, all these things you do. And so then you ask, would they be prepared to trust you because they know you and they know what you'll do, rather than just vote for a political party, in which case then they might go to Reform. So this is where your point about local, you caring about your local constituency, you working, not running away, some colleagues have done, but staying put no matter what the onslaught is, you'll be there. That bit they get. And then you have, well, I don't need to go to Reform, so I've got somebody here who's going to do that stuff for me. That's the other bit in the equation, which is why this polling stuff doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
When you refer to colleagues running away, I mean, you are on a slim majority in Chingford, 1,262 seats. So you're up against it. You've been in politics for a long time and you've decided to still fight.
Yeah.
Do you look at some of the Conservative colleagues who have said, I'm out, and do you look at them with a degree of disappointment, disdain, disgust?
Well, I can only talk about myself. I took a view when I came in that this is not a career, it's a vocation. So if you go into government, fine, bit of icing on the cake, you do some stuff, like the reforms that I was doing, but at the end of the day, I'm an MP first. Then my constituency matters to me as an MP, and I'm doing it because I honestly genuinely believe in public service, which is something often is kind of thrown on one side. We talk about people becoming leader of this and leader of that, and I was leader, but it was never my objective. And so I say to everybody here, honestly, politics has to be played as a long game. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, but what people need to see in you, I think, and believe, is that you are consistent and that you are always, always going to do what is right. As far as you can see, your judgment must be trusted for people that elect you. In other words, you're trying to make sure that they get the best representation possible. That is really what lies behind it. So I've never run away from a fight. Somebody said to me, what gets you up in the morning? I said, the prospect of another fight. And there's plenty going on. And so my point is really, to anybody that's thinking about that is, honestly, the whole purpose in this is you fight and fight and fight for your beliefs. And if lots of the great leaders of the past had stepped away at the key moment, we might have a very different historical perspective. My point is, you only exist to fight, and that's it for what you believe in.
No, so Camilla didn't quite answer your question whether he was disappointed, but I think we got a slight sense of where you are, Sarin. You may well have the ear of Rishi Sunak, but what should Rishi Sunak do in response to Nigel Farage saying he's standing?
I think Rishi Sunak has, look, he's got a very good brain. He retains facts, which I think these debates will be quite important because I think he will trounce Starmer when it comes to factual knowledge. He is very good at that. The one thing he gets up in the morning and does is read stuff and remembers it. So he knows where he is. He knows about the economy. There's no bluster. He knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows how to work it. I think what he's got to do now, personally, he doesn't have to listen to me at all, by the way. I didn't make it to be Prime Minister, so you know why. But the reality is that
he needs to listen to someone, to be frank.
Well,
so
yeah,
I think
okay.
any advice is,
I would tell him this. I would tell him this
You're
privately.
a grey hair, apparently, Iain.
Well, not a lot of it left anyway. So, but the reality is that I would simply say, you need to be bold. People need to see in him that there is a heart which is about them. Now, I know that's the case, because when I talk to him, he's really keen. But what they get instead sometimes is a lot of knowledge. But what they need to see is from him, which is there, is this passion for change which is important because we are also about change. We have to be, but it has to be demonstrable. So there are lots of things right now which trouble my constituents, I know. One is the cost of the net zero targets that they've got. They're not targets anymore, they're obligations. The problem is the cost to taxpayers of achieving those is going to be dramatic. And here we are, probably the best country in the world at getting cleaner environment, and yet we are going to hammer our population with higher taxes to achieve it. I think he needs to be bold and say, do you know what? We all want to get there, and we're going to get there, but we're going to do it at a pace that you can manage and we can all afford. Because at the end of the day, there's no point in forcing people into difficult financial positions and then say, well, we've got an extra yard on this, when we are just about one of the cleanest of the developed world. And that's great, and we're going to continue down that road. But this obsession, there's almost religion about it, isn't going to get us anywhere. Government has to be practical. So he needs, I hope they will say...
Drop the target.
We need to say we will get there, and we're going to get there probably faster than most, but we're not going to do it by bolstering China, by buying batteries from them and Chinese electric cars, which are going to swamp our markets. We're not going to do it by forcing people through heavy taxation, which is one of the reasons why taxes are high, is because of the targets on net zero. We need to be saying boldly, we're going to put you first in this, and we're going to get the balance right, not ideological, but the balance that says we have to get there, but we need to get there at a pace that you can manage.
But
that, for me, would be very important.
But can he actually outright Farage? Because he could say that we need to get to net zero much slower. I know he delayed it from 2030 to 2035. He could go back to 2050. In response to that, Reform will say, we're scrapping net zero altogether. So he gets beaten on that flank. He could then say, as they have this morning, we're going to put a cap on net migration. In response to that, Reform says, oh, we're going to have net zero migration. So he's outflanked on that. He then says about income tax, perhaps, or he says, we're going to offer you tax cuts, and Reform hits them with, we're going to raise the minimum tax rate up to 20 grand and allow more people who are working class, in inverted commas, to keep their money. So at every turn, he can be outdone in rhetoric by Nigel Farage, knowing that he never actually has to put any of these policies into practice.
Well, that's exactly the point, is in the last bit of your comment. We have to be at the place where they would expect the Conservative Party to be, which is the party that recognises always taxpayers come first. So in all of these areas, it comes down to how much of a burden is going to be placed on taxpayers. That's the issue. Now, COVID cost us a lot, so they've had a burden on that. But we've got through that, and the war in Ukraine the same. We're getting through that now. But looking ahead, we need to do more than that. So the reality is that, it's what do they honestly believe that a political party like the Conservative can deliver, if that is the key of what they're saying. And so it's demarking that difference between the two major parties and then having that structure of belief that, OK, well, on balance, they're more likely to be able to deliver it. Sure, Farage, complained and campaigned, just like on Brexit, but they didn't deliver it. At the end of the day, it had to be the Conservative Party that delivered that, and that's the key. So the question is, what's the difference now between you? Who can I trust more? Because, as I said earlier on at the beginning, I just don't think the public still gets this idea that somehow they will pledge their loyalty to Labour, not like they did with Blair, who was, people used to say to me on the doorsteps, I'm voting for Blair. They've never once mentioned Starmer to me on the doorsteps. Big difference.
Serene, just on this thing, do you think that they should, as you said, Camilla, Sunak has already pushed back the net zero target to 2035. Do you think they should actually scrap the year target and just say, we will get there?
Yeah, I think that at least we should be saying, look, we're going to get there, but we want to do it with two things. We're going to move the idea that we get there at the pace we can. It's not to say we don't want to get there, we want to get there, but the two elements exist constantly, which are the more we push, the more we uphold China, the more we invest in China, the more we buy from China, who are a threat to us right now. I mean, what we're doing using TikTok, all parties, is beyond me completely, but that's another argument. The main point is, number one, we strengthen those who wish us harm. Number two, we weaken those who we care for, which is ordinary taxpayers. Not talking about the wealthy people. I'm talking about the people who get by, who have a little bit they put aside, they want to look after their families. These are the people that hated the idea of the imposition in my era of ULEZ, because it just cost them more. They couldn't afford to get another car because, they'd retired or whatever. They need to know that actually when the balance comes in decision-making, you put them first. And if there's a balance between the absolute drive and ideology to get there by a set date and them and the public's cost that they were going to bear, you take the cost and say, we will get there, but we will get there at a pace that we can manage. And it's explaining that to the public. That's what they want to hear from people, that they came first, not the idea we're going to spend more money on this or that. They want to know that their money that they earn is enough for them to get by. And at the moment, they're worried about that.
Can we just briefly talk about D-Day? Obviously, it's the 80th anniversary on Thursday, and I'm asking you because your father was an illustrious RAF pilot. Group Captain Wilfred George Gerald Duncan Smith. He was a flying ace of the Second World War. Actually, Nigel Farage mentioned this polling yesterday, but the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has found that only 48% of 18 to 34-year-olds recognise the term D-Day and what it refers to.
That's sad, actually, because it was vitally important. It's difficult sometimes to explain to a generation that can get instantaneous news and can fly to any part of the world they like, and where life may appear to them to be difficult, but, you know, at the moment their lives are under threat. That what all those guys who landed on the beaches on June the 6th, and also my father wasn't there, he was already fighting in southern France, trying to stop the Germans, reinforcing them, so they were attacking the Germans in the south of France, which took the pressure off the north. And what they did was because politicians had failed. Okay, let's be very clear about this. 60 million people died in the Second World War because politicians failed to see the threat and deal with it early. And that's it. And that's what this is all about. And schools should be constantly saying that to people. You know, this is about early decision making. This is about setting the example of taking difficult decisions. You know, and that's what I think the spending increase today that the Prime Minister's promised is a very good start. It recognises the threat.
On defence.
On defence. Yes. And my worry, therefore, right now is that, OK, they don't recognise it, but it's for politicians to say to them, there is a threat. And this is a little bit like 1930s all over again. We've got Russia invading Ukraine. We've got the Chinese threatening Taiwan, busy, you know, working with the Iranians to organise an attack in Gaza to take the pressure off the Russians, knowing the Americans will go to Israel as they do. All of these things are part of a pattern. It's happening right in front of us. And my father never forgave the politicians, except for Churchill, after the war, for failing and for him losing a lot of friends. And he said, I'll never forgive them for not taking the decisions they had to take. We need never have been in this war. And I think we're in exactly the same position now. We have to describe to younger generation, we are now facing the biggest threat since the ending of the Cold War. And June the 6th is about remembering we didn't need to have 60 million people die because we got the decisions wrong. I think we're heading in that direction. People say I'm a warmonger, I'm sanctioned by the Chinese, but I'm serious about this. If June the 6th really wants to resonate with young people, we are facing these decisions today. And if we shirk them again, you know, if we go using TikTok, all of these political parties, because, it's a quicker way to get through to a different generation, this is all playing into their hands. They don't have to have elections. We do.
Sir Iain Duncan Smith, thank you so much, for that powerful part at the end, but also for your fascinating takes on where the Conservative Party may be able to eke out some more positive news over the next few weeks. As you say, Camilla, good luck in Chingford. When does your seat declare? Are you a late one? Are you an early one on the night?
Well, it depends what the margin of defeat or victory is, I guess. We're normally kind of middle ground, really. We're probably early hours in the morning, normally.
OK.
But who knows?
We'll be watching out for your result. Thank you so much.
I don't mind it late if it's going to be me.
Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.